December 19th, 1944. The pre-dawn chill clung to the Ardennes forest like a wet blanket, frosting the bare branches in a brittle lattice of ice. Inside the cramped turret of a Panther tank, Oberfeldwebel Klaus Reinhardt rubbed his frozen fingers against the small notebook clenched in his hand. Each page, carefully annotated with targets, positions, and expected American movements, seemed suddenly irrelevant. Outside, the forest hummed faintly with the whisper of distant engines, and the smell of smoke from previous skirmishes lingered in the air. Reinhardt had learned to trust the predictable rhythm of armoured warfare. Panther tanks were methodical, their 75mm guns precise, their frontal armour nearly impervious to the average Allied shell. He had been drilled for years to rely on these advantages, to believe that the combination of German engineering and disciplined strategy could hold any line. Yet today, a new variable had entered the field, one that defied everything he had been taught. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Reports had arrived earlier in the week. American tank destroyers, capable of speeds and maneuvers, Reinhardt had previously considered impossible. Whispers among crews spoke of vehicles moving faster than any German tank, striking from angles that seemed to defy logic. Reinhardt, like many of his colleagues, refused to believe it. A 17-ton vehicle, armoured too thin to stop a heavy machine gun, racing across the forest at 55 miles per hour? Preposterous. It was a rumour so absurd that it seemed drawn from the fevered imagination of frightened soldiers. Yet the rumours were consistent, appearing in after-action reports from Normandy, Italy, and now the Ardennes. Panzer crews had encountered these machines, M18 Hellcats, as the Americans called them, and had struggled to comprehend their behaviour. One report, filed by a lieutenant of the 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion, described an engagement in which 3 Panthers were destroyed within minutes, while the enemy vanished before their guns could track it. "They move like shadows," the report stated. "You see the tracer, and then they are gone." The psychological weight of these reports was immense. German doctrine emphasized careful engagement, meticulous aiming, and methodical conservation of ammunition. Crews were trained to calculate the trajectory, range, and armor penetration of their shells with precision, using terrain and hull-down positions to minimize exposure. Patience and calculation were virtues. Speed and improvisation were liabilities. And now, Reinhardt faced an enemy that made patience a death sentence. To understand why German crews reacted with disbelief, one must examine the broader context. By late 1944, the Wehrmacht was stretched thin across multiple fronts. The invasion of Normandy in June had shattered the strategic advantage Germany had enjoyed in Western Europe. Armour production was limited. Panther and Tiger tanks were sophisticated but slow to replace. Each loss felt acutely. In contrast, American production capacity seemed inexhaustible. While German factories laboured to produce a handful of Panthers or a few dozen Tigers each month, American plants were churning out thousands of Sherman tanks and hundreds of M18 Hellcats. Industrial disparity was not the only factor. The philosophical approach to armoured warfare differed fundamentally between the two armies. German doctrine had evolved from the principle of decisive, heavily protected firepower. Tanks were designed to dominate through superior guns and armour. Maneuverability existed, but only within the calculated framework of combined arms operations. American doctrine, by contrast, had embraced mobility as a primary survival mechanism. The M18 Hellcat exemplified this philosophy. Light armour, a 76mm high-velocity gun, and unprecedented speed. It was a vehicle built not to withstand hits, but to avoid them altogether. Even the engineering that enabled such speed seemed unbelievable to German crews. The Hellcat weighed just under 18 tons, powered by an aircraft-derived radial engine producing 400 horsepower. Its torsion bar suspension and hydrostatic automatic transmission allowed drivers to accelerate from 0 to 30 miles per hour in seconds, maintain 55 miles per hour on roads, and sustain cross-country speeds exceeding 25 miles per hour in rough terrain. These specifications were almost absurd when contrasted with a Panther's 15 horsepower per ton ratio and a maximum road speed of 34 miles per hour. Reinhardt, like many of his comrades, had been taught to trust numbers. The thickness of armor, the muzzle velocity of a placed shell, the calculated time to traverse a turret, and yet the reality was that the Americans had deliberately broken these rules. Their doctrine, forged in the deserts of North Africa and refined in training centers such as Camp Hood, Texas, emphasized shoot and scoot tactics. Crews were trained to engage, fire, and disappear before a return shot could be mounted. Speed was life, and every ounce of armor sacrificed was an investment in survival. By the morning of December 19th, the Ardennes became the proving ground for this collision of belief and reality. German tankers like Reinhardt were about to confront a paradox: a vehicle too light to survive a frontal engagement, yet fast enough to strike and vanish at will. The forest, silent but for the distant engines, held the stage for a lesson that would shatter years of training and doctrine. Reinhardt adjusted his binoculars, peering through the pre-dawn fog. Somewhere beyond the tree line, American tank destroyers were moving into position. The forest air carried the faint smell of diesel, mixed with the metallic tang of frost on steel. Reinhardt's stomach tightened. He had seen Panther crews destroyed before, but nothing had prepared him for what these reports suggested: that a 17-ton machine could outrun the heaviest tank in the Wehrmacht and strike with lethal precision. And yet, in the minds of German tankers, disbelief remained. It was not just skepticism, it was a psychological defense. To accept the reality of the M18 Hellcat's speed and lethality would mean confronting an uncomfortable truth. Their carefully honed doctrine, their reliance on armored superiority, and their belief in the invincibility of German engineering were no longer sufficient to guarantee survival. The idea that a lightly armored, agile American tank could rewrite the rules of engagement challenged not only their tactics, but their very understanding of warfare. The stage was set. The Panther crews, armored and methodical, were about to encounter an opponent whose entire design philosophy was a direct affront to German assumptions. In this confrontation between expectation and reality, speed and cunning would eclipse brute strength. And for Reinhardt and his comrades, the first taste of this new kind of armored warfare would come not with a gradual revelation, but with an abrupt, undeniable demonstration of the impossible. The M18 Hellcat's specifications were so radical that any German tanker who first glimpsed one assumed the reports were exaggerated. Yet the vehicle's existence was no rumour. Lightly armoured, just over 1 inch at its thickest point on the turret front and half an inch on the hull, it could not hope to survive a direct hit from a Panther's 75mm gun or a Tiger's 88mm cannon. In conventional terms, it was suicidal, and yet it moved. Engineers at Buick's Flint, Michigan, division had achieved what German crews could hardly imagine. The R975 radial engine, originally designed for aircraft, delivered 400 horsepower in the later production models. Combined with a 17-ton chassis, this created an exceptional power-to-weight ratio, 22 horsepower per ton, compared to the Panther's 15. The Hellcat's torsion bar suspension absorbed the uneven terrain of European battlefields, while its hydrostatic automatic transmission allowed the driver to maintain full speed without manual clutch manipulation. For a German tanker, conditioned to the deliberate pace of heavy armour, this was a mechanical impossibility. The philosophy behind the vehicle was equally foreign. Where German doctrine emphasized methodical engagement, the M18's designers prioritized evasion. Crews trained at Camp Hood were instructed to never remain stationary more than 30 seconds after firing. Their motto, "Speed is life," was not hyperbole but literal instruction. This training translated into battlefield tactics that German tankers found incomprehensible: ambush, flank, strike, and vanish before a return shot could be mounted. The first large-scale confrontations occurred in Normandy, beginning in late July 1944. Reports from German units documented engagements in which M18s would appear at the edge of visibility, fire, and disappear in less than 3 minutes. A Panther turret required roughly 60 seconds to traverse fully. Within that interval, an M18 could displace over a mile. German crews could aim, fire, and wait for the shot to reach the target, only to find that the enemy vehicle had already vanished into the folds of terrain. On the 29th of July, near Coutances, elements of the 503rd and 509th Panzer battalions reported multiple encounters with what they described as ghost tanks. One entry noted, "Our best efforts at coordinated fire failed. They move faster than our guns can track. The enemy is always gone before impact." These reports, initially dismissed by some commanders as exaggeration, would soon prove prescient in the Ardennes. By December 1944, the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, placed German armoured units directly against the M18. The 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion, deployed in defence of Bastogne, exemplified the tactical employment of the Hellcat. They operated with small, nimble formations, often 4 vehicles per platoon, striking from unexpected angles. American after-action reports note that during the defense of Nouville, individual M18s destroyed multiple Panther and Tiger tanks while losing minimal numbers themselves. One Hellcat, under Lieutenant David Hagens, reportedly accounted for 7 enemy tanks in a single engagement while remaining unscathed. The disparity was not only tactical but logistical. While Germany struggled to maintain monthly Panther production at 90 units, American factories had already completed the M18 production run of 2,500 units, despite initial contracts for fewer than 1,000. Each German tank lost was irreplaceable. Each American Hellcat destroyed could be replaced within weeks. For Reinhardt and his peers, the psychological impact was as severe as the material losses. It was no longer merely that they were encountering a superior vehicle in combat, it was that the Americans could sustain these losses indefinitely. The engineering brilliance of the Hellcat reinforced this superiority. Every plate of armor was angled strategically to maximize deflection. The vehicle's lightweight allowed it to traverse mud, snow, and temporary bridges that immobilized Panthers or Tigers. Ground pressure was minimal, just over 10 pounds per square inch, compared to 15 and 16 pounds for the heavier German vehicles. In adverse conditions, where a King Tiger risked becoming a stationary target, the Hellcat maintained mobility and initiative. German crews, trained to calculate and exploit static advantages, were ill-equipped for this type of warfare. Reports from the 2nd Panzer Division during December 1944 describe disorientation and disbelief among crews. One officer wrote, "We aimed, we fired, and yet they were gone. The impossible is real, and it hunts us." The cognitive dissonance was profound. Years of training had instilled confidence in armor, firepower, and methodical engagement. Now, the rules had changed overnight. Reinhardt's experience on the 19th of December mirrors these accounts. From his Panther's turret, he observed flashes of movement at impossible speeds, tracer fire arriving from positions he could not reach in time. The M18s appeared almost spectrally, striking with lethal precision, vanishing into the dense forest, and reappearing at new points of engagement before German crews could reposition. Attempts to adapt standard tactics failed. The methodical approach that had served him throughout the war was irrelevant against this new class of armoured opponent. Technical reports from German intelligence later confirmed the vehicle's capabilities. Maximum road speed, 55 miles per hour. Acceleration, 0 to 30 in 7 seconds. Gun penetration, capable of destroying Panther side armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards with high-velocity rounds. Crew training emphasized ambush, rapid firing, and immediate displacement. In combination, these factors made the M18 nearly untouchable in its optimal engagement envelope. Even when Panther and Tiger crews recognized the threat, opportunities to counter it were limited. The M18's design deliberately traded armor for mobility. Frontal engagements were fatal for the Americans, but flanking shots and hit-and-run tactics rendered the German advantage irrelevant. Oberfeldwebel Reinhardt, like many others, found that every predictable maneuver was punished, every methodical approach countered. The psychological consequence cannot be overstated. German tankers were forced to reconcile two conflicting truths: that their engineering and tactical doctrine were theoretically superior in isolation, yet utterly insufficient against an enemy who rejected conventional principles. For the first time in the war, the notion of technological supremacy was insufficient. Reports detail how crews began to refer to Hellcats as ghosts or devils, language reflecting not myth, but the cognitive shock of encountering a machine that violated every expectation. By the end of the day, Reinhardt's unit had lost 3 Panthers in engagements lasting less than 10 minutes. The Hellcats were gone almost as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the smoke of destroyed German armor. Logbooks, maintained by his fellow officers, recorded stunned admiration for the enemy's design, an impossible machine driven by impossible men. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The M18's effect extended beyond battlefield encounters. German reports circulated within armoured divisions highlighted not only tactical losses, but also the erosion of confidence. Veteran crews, previously reliant on calculated superiority, were forced to confront the possibility that their assumptions about combat were flawed. The speed, precision, and audacity of American tank destroyers introduced a level of unpredictability that undermined morale, a factor as consequential as any gun or shell. The encounter also underscored the industrial and logistical chasm separating the two sides. For each Panther destroyed, there were 8 replacement American vehicles, a combination of M4s, M10s, and M18s available, almost immediately. German losses were irreplaceable, and the pressure on crews intensified with each engagement. Survival was no longer contingent solely upon skill or bravery. It depended on adaptability to a new form of warfare that the Wehrmacht had neither anticipated nor prepared for. By the close of December 19th, Reinhardt and his fellow tankers had internalized a harsh reality. The M18 Hellcat was not merely a faster tank. It represented a fundamental shift in the rules of armored warfare. The collision of German doctrine with American innovation revealed an irony, as brutal as it was instructive. The very principles that had guided Panther and Tiger crews for years, armor, methodical fire, and deliberate movement, were neutralized by a vehicle that embraced speed, industrial efficiency, and tactical unpredictability. The lesson extended beyond immediate combat. Within armored units, discussions arose about the necessity of rapid response, reconnaissance, and avoidance of predictable engagement patterns. German reports recommended modifications to doctrine, including greater emphasis on flexibility and dispersed formations, yet time and resources were insufficient to implement meaningful change before the Ardennes offensive faltered. The Hellcat, in essence, had not only destroyed tanks, but had also dismantled a mindset that had defined German armoured warfare for half a decade. The aftermath of December 19, 1944, was not immediately apparent on the battlefield. Smoke from destroyed Panthers lingered in the frigid Ardennes air, mingling with the acrid scent of spent ammunition and frozen earth. Oberfeldwebel Klaus Reinhardt surveyed the remnants of his unit's losses. 3 Panthers lost in rapid succession, tracks torn, turrets twisted, and the corpses of his comrades slumped over machine gun mounts. The American M18s that had inflicted such damage were nowhere to be seen. For Reinhardt and many of his peers, the realization settled gradually, like frost creeping over metal. The reports had been true. The M18 Hellcat's combination of speed, firepower, and tactical employment had shattered expectations not merely by destroying tanks, but by rendering the Wehrmacht's doctrinal assumptions obsolete. In journals later reviewed by historians, tank commanders wrote in stark terms, "Our guns, our armor, our training, all insufficient. The enemy has rewritten the rules, and we are unprepared." The lessons were both technical and psychological. On the material side, German engineers and planners were confronted with a harsh truth. Even the most sophisticated heavy tank, whether Panther or Tiger, could be outmaneuvered by a lighter, faster vehicle if the enemy exploited mobility over brute force. Every ton of armor added to a Panther limited acceleration and agility, while every extra second required to traverse its turret or move across terrain allowed a nimble Hellcat to strike from the side and vanish. German tactical manuals, written over years of doctrinal refinement, suddenly seemed rigid and inadequate. Attempts to adjust doctrine were limited by circumstances. The German army faced critical shortages of fuel, spare parts, and trained crews. While American units could afford aggressive experimentation and replacement losses, German tank battalions were constrained by attrition and dwindling industrial output. Panther production, never exceeding 90 vehicles per month by late 1944, could not meet frontline losses. Tigers were fewer still. In contrast, American production had already delivered the entire planned run of M18's 2,500 vehicles by the end of October 1944. For every Panther destroyed, the Allies could field multiple replacements. This disparity magnified the psychological effect. German crews, already aware of dwindling supplies and fuel shortages, now had to confront an enemy who could sustain losses with minimal consequence. Every encounter with a Hellcat was not only a tactical challenge, but a reminder of industrial imbalance. Reports from the 2nd Panzer Division describe an almost surreal disbelief. "We aim, we fire, and yet they are gone. The impossible is real." The term ghost tank appeared repeatedly in officer journals, a linguistic marker of cognitive shock and the collapse of conventional expectation. Beyond the immediate tactical consequences, the M18's success validated the underlying philosophy of the American Tank Destroyer Command. Brigadier General Andrew Bruce, who had championed the shoot and scoot doctrine, had calculated that mobility could trump armor in a theater where industrial and logistical support favored sustained rapid operations. By February 1943, training at Camp Hood had instilled in American crews the principles of speed, precision, and rapid displacement. The Hellcat's performance in the Ardennes represented the culmination of this doctrinal experiment, a vehicle that embodied theory in combat with brutal efficiency. The strategic implications were significant. The Ardennes offensive itself would fail, not solely due to Allied resistance, but in part because German armoured units were unable to regain the initiative once confronted with American mobility and superior numbers. The inability to counter fast-moving threats like the Hellcat compounded operational stagnation. While German tanks remained potent in direct combat, the battlefield environment had shifted. Speed, flexibility, and industrial endurance now defined the capacity for operational success. The M18's legacy extended beyond the immediate engagements. Post-war analyses by both Allied and German historians recognized the vehicle as a turning point in armored doctrine. German reports explicitly noted that their previous emphasis on frontal armor and methodical engagement was inadequate in a context dominated by mobile, lightly armored, high-velocity threats. The psychological lessons were equally profound. Doctrinal rigidity could be as lethal as enemy fire. The Hellcat forced experienced tankers to confront a paradoxical truth. Survival was sometimes achieved not through strength, but through rapid adaptation. Reinhardt's personal reflections, recorded in post-war memoirs, capture this cognitive shift. For years, we believed that engineering perfection and careful planning would preserve us. The Hellcat proved that the battlefield could be faster, smaller, and more lethal than we imagined. We had to accept that what seemed impossible was not only possible but inevitable. These words resonate not merely as anecdote, but as a reflection of a broader shift in German armoured warfare thinking. The engagements also illuminated the interplay between technological innovation and human perception. German crews were trained to calculate and anticipate, relying on the predictability of machines and men. The Hellcat's combination of extreme speed and tactical doctrine exploited this expectation, generating not only material losses but profound disorientation. Crews were forced to revise their mental models in real time, a cognitive burden compounded by the relentless pace of combat. Modern military psychologists note that such rapid recalibration under fire is a critical factor in unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. Logistically, the Hellcat's design highlighted the advantages of integrated engineering and doctrinal alignment. Every component, from the radial engine to the torsion bar suspension and hydrostatic transmission, was optimized to facilitate the doctrine of rapid engagement and withdrawal. The vehicle's low ground pressure allowed cross-country mobility in terrain that immobilized heavier German tanks. Bridges of insufficient class for Tigers could sustain Hellcats, allowing American units to exploit mobility in ways the Wehrmacht could not anticipate. Each technical specification directly supported tactical doctrine, demonstrating an alignment between engineering and operational philosophy rarely achieved in armored warfare at the time. These principles carried lasting implications beyond World War II. Post-war armored design increasingly emphasized mobility over weight in various theaters, from the Korean Peninsula to the Middle East. The notion that speed, reconnaissance, and adaptability could offset heavier armor found resonance in American and NATO doctrine for decades. In this sense, the M18 Hellcat was not merely a battlefield tool, but a paradigm-shifting instrument in the evolution of mechanized warfare. For German tankers like Reinhardt, the personal cost of this paradigm shift was immense. Losses incurred during encounters with the Hellcat were not abstract statistics. They were comrades, vehicles, and years of doctrinal certainty. The psychological toll was compounded by the realization that no single engagement could restore the pre-existing assumptions about armored combat. Survival now required adaptability, intuition, and an acknowledgement of the limitations imposed by both physics and industrial disparity. Yet even in defeat and shock, the encounters yielded profound lessons. German observers noted the importance of reconnaissance, the dangers of static formations, and the need for flexibility in armored tactics. Although the Wehrmacht would not recover from the industrial and strategic imbalance, these engagements informed post-war analyses of armored doctrine, influencing both German and Allied military thought in subsequent decades. The Ardennes, therefore, became a crucible not only for battlefield innovation, but for cognitive adaptation under conditions of overwhelming challenge. Ultimately, the story of the German tankers facing the M18 Hellcat is one of collision between expectation and reality, doctrine and innovation, human perception and mechanical possibility. The disbelief they initially harbored was rational in the context of their training and experience. A 17-ton vehicle, moving at 55 miles per hour, capable of destroying heavily armored tanks while remaining elusive, violated every principle ingrained in German armored culture. The subsequent encounters forced a reckoning, demonstrating that the rules of combat are neither immutable nor exclusively dictated by raw firepower. Reinhardt's final notes from the Ardennes reflect a mixture of awe and resignation. We faced machines that should not have been possible, men who wielded them with precision, and a doctrine that rendered our strengths irrelevant. In the end, the battle was not lost by guns, but by assumptions. These words encapsulate a truth that extends beyond any single battlefield. In war, as in history, adaptation often proves more decisive than technical superiority alone. The M18 Hellcat's introduction into combat illustrated a broader truth about World War II. Innovation, combined with doctrine and industrial capacity, could redefine engagement on a scale that brute force alone could not match. For German tankers, disbelief transformed into reluctant respect, and respect into strategic recalibration that, though ultimately insufficient to alter the outcome of the Ardennes offensive, left a lasting imprint on the psychology of armored warfare. As historians reflect on the Ardennes battles, the legacy of the M18 remains clear. It was not merely a vehicle but a lesson that speed, mobility, and tactical ingenuity can neutralize advantages once considered insurmountable. For every Panther lost to a Hellcat, German crews confronted the unsettling reality that the future of armoured combat was no longer theirs to define. And in that confrontation, the human element, the shock, disbelief, and eventual adaptation proved as consequential as any mechanical specification or shell trajectory. In the cold December forests, amid smoke, shattered steel, and the quiet testimony of frozen earth, Oberfeldwebel Klaus Reinhardt and his comrades came to understand a paradox. What seemed impossible was, in fact, the instrument of their reckoning. A 17-ton machine, moving faster than any tank in history, had not only destroyed German armour, but also dismantled assumptions, reshaping the mental and tactical landscape of war forever. The M18 Hellcat, in its speed, ingenuity, and audacity, became more than a machine. It became a symbol of the evolving reality of World War II armoured warfare. It demonstrated that victory in mechanized combat depended not solely on weight, armour, or firepower, but on the integration of engineering brilliance, doctrinal clarity, and the capacity to exploit psychological advantage. For the German tankers who first encountered it, disbelief gave way to understanding, and understanding underscored a bitter truth. The battlefield had changed, and only those willing to rethink its rules could survive. The winter of 1944 in the Ardennes forest was merciless. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, clinging to the twisted trunks of firs and pooling in the shell-cratered fields between villages. The air was sharp with cold, the kind that stung nostrils and froze the breath before it could leave the body. For German tankers like Oberfeldwebel Klaus Reinhardt, it was a season marked not only by physical hardship, but by the slow, creeping weight of disbelief. Reinhardt had faced the enemy in countless engagements over the past 3 years: Poland, France, the hedgerows of Normandy. He had witnessed the destruction wrought by air raids, artillery, and Allied infantry. Yet nothing had prepared him. For the first time he saw an M18 Hellcat. The vehicle's sudden appearance on the battlefield, its impossibly fast traverse across frozen roads and muddy fields, seemed to defy not only the rules of warfare, but the laws of mechanics themselves. German crews had trained under a doctrine that prized methodical engagement, calculated positioning, and the superior firepower and armour of their tanks. Panthers and Tigers were marvels of engineering, slow but nearly invulnerable in frontal combat. German tankers believed that their vehicles were nearly invincible in the right hands, that speed was secondary to precision and protection. But on December 19th, 1944, in the woods near Noville, all of that belief was tested. The Hellcat's design was simple in theory, yet revolutionary in execution. Light, mobile, and astonishingly fast, it carried a 76mm gun capable of penetrating the thinner side armour of Panthers and Tigers. Its torsion bar suspension allowed rapid traversal over terrain that immobilized heavier German vehicles. Its hydrostatic automatic transmission translated engine power into controlled acceleration without the delay and strain of manual, clutch operation. In short, it embodied a doctrine of survival that the Wehrmacht had neither anticipated nor understood. Reinhardt recalled the moment vividly. The initial flash of movement between snow-laden trees, the tracer fire that struck from unexpected angles, and the disorienting realization that the enemy vanished almost immediately after firing. In the logs of his unit, he recorded a simple, stark phrase: impossible, yet true. This moment of cognitive dissonance, the confrontation between what he had been trained to believe and the mechanical reality before him, would become emblematic of the Ardennes campaign for German tank crews. The human element of this encounter cannot be overstated. Tank warfare is as much psychological as it is mechanical. The confidence of a crew is rooted in predictability, the belief that their weapons will function as designed, that their armour will provide protection, and that their opponents are constrained by the same principles. of physics and doctrine. The Hellcat violated every assumption. It moved faster than any tank they had ever seen, struck with deadly accuracy, and disappeared before a return shot could be mounted. For Reinhardt and his peers, this was more than a tactical problem. It was a profound psychological shock. It was not only speed that disoriented German crews. The broader operational context amplified the effect. While Germany struggled to maintain Panther production at roughly 90 units per month and Tiger production at even lower levels, American factories had already completed the full M18 production run of 2,500 vehicles by October 1944. Each loss on the German side was irreplaceable, while American losses could be remedied within weeks. The disparity between industrial capacity and battlefield attrition compounded the tactical advantage of the Hellcat, embedding a sense of inevitability in German minds. No matter how skillfully they fought, the enemy could simply outproduce and outmaneuver them. This imbalance had immediate effects. Crews reported hesitation in engagement, increased reliance on defensive positions, and a growing reluctance to take initiative. Oberfeldwebel Reinhardt noted in a post-war memoir that even veteran tankers, previously confident in their Panther's invulnerability, hesitated when confronted with the speed and unpredictability of the M18. The mental strain of constantly recalculating tactics in real time, while simultaneously witnessing the rapid destruction of comrades and vehicles, exacted a toll that extended beyond the battlefield. Yet, in this adversity, the Hellcat also provided lessons in adaptation and the limits of rigid doctrine. German officers quickly recognized that conventional frontal assaults were suicidal against fast-moving targets, and that dispersed formations and flexible engagement strategies were essential. Reconnaissance, previously a secondary consideration, became critical. Units that attempted to engage with the same predictability as in previous campaigns suffered disproportionately. While these adaptations could not reverse the strategic imbalance of the Ardennes offensive, they highlighted a profound truth. In mechanized warfare, the human capacity for adaptation is as decisive as any technical specification. Reinhardt's reflections also reveal a subtle, paradoxical respect for the vehicle and its crews. The Hellcat, designed with deliberate trade-offs, light armor for mobility, reduced weight for speed, and a powerful gun capable of exploiting enemy weaknesses, represented an alignment between doctrine, engineering, and execution rarely seen in armored warfare. Its success was not merely a matter of chance, it was the product of calculated ingenuity. Crews trained to move, strike, and vanish executed their orders with discipline and precision, leveraging every technical advantage the vehicle provided. For German tankers, witnessing this combination of design and tactical doctrine was both terrifying and instructive. The aftermath of these encounters extended beyond immediate loss. German field reports and post-war analyses emphasize the long-term psychological impact. Disbelief transformed into cautious respect, and respect into strategic recalibration. The experiences of December 1944 demonstrated that survival on the modern battlefield required not only superior weapons and armor, but also flexibility, speed, and cognitive agility. Every Panther or Tiger destroyed by an M18 reinforced a broader lesson. The battlefield was evolving faster than doctrine, and failure to adapt could be fatal. Industrial disparity further reinforced this lesson. Germany, constrained by material shortages, fuel limitations, and a collapsing infrastructure, could not hope to match the rapid production and deployment of American tank destroyers. The M18, light and easily transportable, could be replaced quickly, moved to critical sectors, and integrated into combined operations with infantry and airborne units. German losses, by contrast, were enduring. Each engagement was not merely a tactical encounter, but a reinforcement of strategic disadvantage, a tangible measure of the industrial and logistical imbalance that defined the latter stages of the war. Yet the Hellcat's impact was not solely negative for German observers. Its encounters provided a living case study in operational flexibility, demonstrating the value of speed, maneuver, and initiative. Post-war German analyses frequently cited the Hellcat as evidence that lighter, faster armoured vehicles could neutralise heavier tanks when combined with disciplined doctrine. Lessons drawn from these experiences influenced post-war armoured development in Germany and abroad, shaping the design of vehicles that prioritised mobility and tactical adaptability over sheer armour thickness. The final irony, perhaps, lies in the enduring perception of the M18. To German tankers, it was initially impossible, a ghost that moved faster than physics should allow. Yet in hindsight, it was precisely the product of careful engineering, rigorous training, and doctrinal clarity. Its seeming implausibility was the result of a deliberate philosophy: mobility as a survival mechanism, speed as both offence and defence. The disbelief of German crews underscores a broader truth about innovation in warfare. Humans are often slow to recognize capabilities that challenge entrenched assumptions, even when confronted with incontrovertible evidence. Reinhardt's concluding reflections are poignant. In his post-war memoirs, he wrote, "We faced a machine that should not have existed. Its speed, its audacity, and the men who wielded it forced us to rethink what we believed about war. We lost tanks, we lost comrades, and yet, in that loss, we gained a deeper understanding of the battlefield. The rules we had trusted no longer applied. The future belonged to those who could move faster than our expectations." In this sense, the story of the German tankers and the M18 Hellcat transcends a simple account of destruction and loss. It is a study in the collision between expectation and reality, between training and innovation, between human perception and mechanical possibility. It illustrates the profound ways in which technology can shape not only outcomes, but the very psychology of combatants. For Reinhardt and countless others, the encounter marked a moment of cognitive reckoning, a recognition that victory on the battlefield is as much about adaptation and flexibility as it is about firepower or armour. The Ardennes, in this narrative, becomes more than a campaign. It is a crucible of learning, a demonstration of how doctrine, engineering, and human perception interact under the most extreme conditions. The M18 Hellcat emerges not merely as a vehicle, but as a DRA symbol of ingenuity, of doctrinal innovation, and of the unsettling power of the unexpected. It was a machine that disproved assumptions, challenged beliefs, and reshaped the understanding of mechanized warfare for both its operators and those who opposed it. In the final analysis, the encounters between German tankers and the M18 illustrate a fundamental lesson of World War II. War is not determined solely by individual skill, by courage, or by the technical specifications of any single weapon. It is determined by the interplay of doctrine, industrial capacity, adaptability, and human cognition. The disbelief of German crews was not merely a psychological reaction. It was the manifestation of a deeper strategic truth that the battlefield belongs to those who anticipate, adapt, and exploit opportunity more rapidly than their opponent. As Reinhardt and his comrades withdrew from the snowbound Ardennes forests, the memory of the M18 lingered. Not as a phantom, but as an enduring lesson, that in warfare, as in history, the impossible can become reality, and those who refuse to see it for what it is risk destruction. The Hellcat had moved faster than any tank, struck with lethal precision, and vanished, and in doing so, it had rewritten the expectations of an entire generation of armoured soldiers. Even decades later, as historians analyse the engagements, the narrative remains compelling. The M18's combination of speed, tactical doctrine, and operational flexibility created a psychological and strategic shockwave that extended beyond the immediate losses it inflicted. Its story is a testament to the power of innovation, the consequences of rigid thinking, and the subtle but decisive ways in which human perception shapes the outcomes of war. The Ardennes' winter faded, and the forests grew silent once more. The tanks lay abandoned, twisted in the snow, while the lessons of speed, mobility, and adaptation endured. For the German crews, who first faced the Hellcat, disbelief became understanding, Understanding became respect, and respect became the bitter acknowledgement that the battlefield had changed forever. The 17-ton, 55-mile-per-hour Hellcat was gone from sight, but not from memory. It remained a symbol of ingenuity, of inevitability, and of the profound consequences of challenging what was once thought impossible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.